This video will contain major spoilers for every episode up through Season 4, Episode 5 of Game of Thrones. You have been warned. So, I just spent 4 fucking days watching all of Game of Thrones, and I ended up enjoying it quite a bit, which I really didn't expect to enjoy as much as I did. But you can check out this video I just did explaining how I found the appeal of Game of Thrones, and that can give you some basic idea of how I got into this show and what the appeal is to me. This is gonna be more of like a free-form sort of review or impressions, or just I talk about the show, because some people might want to hear what I have to say about it. And I figure since Game of Thrones is pretty much entirely a character-driven narrative, then the best way to talk about it would be to take each character and talk about their storyline and themselves as people and what I think. For starters, I may as well go with the Lannisters, because they are my favorite house in the story, and not just because of Tyrion. I know everyone loves Tyrion, he's probably my favorite character too. I mean, I really can't not love the guy. He's such a great character, so likable. And, you know, a lot of people consider Tyrion to be sort of the good guy, where the show is so full of obviously evil characters, and especially Tyrion's family is so full of people who do bad things, that Tyrion is sort of seen as the White Knight. He is the good guy amidst all these evil people. But what makes Tyrion interesting is that he's not just a good guy. Obviously, Ned Stark, who was a man of honor, he was more of the White Knight, and even he was not all good. Ned Stark was not just a martyr for the cause of everyone in the story. He had done dishonorable things in spite of his code. He had, you know, fathered a bastard son in Jon Snow. He had done vaguely dishonorable things. In the end, he kind of does twist his king's words when he writes the final letter, because he doesn't write my son Joffrey, he writes my rightful heir. So no character in this series is pure. No character is just all good. They've all got blood on their hands. They've all murdered people who maybe didn't deserve it or didn't need to be murdered. You know, Arya Stark kills a kid in the first season, and maybe she could have just gotten away without killing him, but she's turned into a crazy monster at this point, but we'll get to her later. So my point is, what makes Tyrion interesting is not just that he's so likable as a person, and that he's such a good guy, but that he also is a guy who just drinks all day and goes to brothels and has sex with lots of women, and he's, you know, he kills a man in like one of the early episodes with a shield, no less. He does have blood on his hands. He does cause the deaths of people, whether he chooses to or not. I think Tyrion Lannister had a lot of potential to come off as a douchebag if he had just been alone throughout the series. In the early episodes, he's snarky and fun, but you get the sense that he thinks he's better than everyone else. But what makes him cool is the people they surround him with. They give him Bronn, the swordsman, who is this totally laid back, you know, guy who Tyrion can't possibly push around because he's like a force of nature almost. Bronn is just the right companion for Tyrion to have. And then he also gets this Squire kid later on. What's so great about the Squire is that he's such a completely great kid and Squire, and he's not smart, he doesn't really talk, he's not that intelligent, but he's such a good guy that Tyrion can't put him down. If it had been any other Squire, Tyrion would make jokes about him and put him down just like he does everyone else, but that's what, the kid is so good that even Tyrion's like, wow, you do your job better than I do mine. So they gave him just the right compliments to his character to make him, and Shay, the prostitute who is completely overpowering, who he can't really argue against, he tries to tease her and she just kind of bowls him over. So everyone he's surrounded with can bounce off of him and show you the weaknesses that he has as a person, so that even though he's constantly making everyone else look bad, there's still characters who can remind us that he's human and sort of drag him down to earth. And so Tyrion is not just a great character, but he's a great character in the context of the story with all the characters surrounding him. Then we have Jaime and Cersei, and I grouped these two together even though their stories diverge for the most part. They're not together throughout all of seasons 2 and 3, but the reasons I like them are very similar, where both of them are characters who are fundamentally broken. They've done a lot of evil shit, unnecessarily so a lot of the time. But you can completely understand why they are the way they are. All you have to do is look at their father, Tywin Lannister, and see the kind of character he is and the kind of expectations that he's put on them, and think about the way that they grew up and the way that they act towards each other and towards their children and things like that, and it just makes sense. Even though they are ostensibly these evil characters, you can't really question their actions because you're like, yeah, that was something you shouldn't have done and you should be punished for, but I totally get why you did it. Jaime in particular is an obvious, I mean, they make him a badass. He's a totally handsome dude. He's this cool guy. You know, he gets tied to a post and has to fucking shit himself for months on end, but he still gets up, breaks people's necks, goes on a rampage, you know, stuff like that. And of course, he becomes sympathetic because of the way he interacts with the spear lady, whose name I need to fucking remember. The adventure that he has throughout the later part of season 2 and early season 3 really fleshes out his character and makes him more sympathetic. But the fact that he's such an evil jackass is also what makes him interesting. Once again, the characters in the show are great because they can be good and evil at the same time. Cersei, she just has the best dialogue. No matter who you put her against, she's just such a bitch, but she's a bitch in a way that's like, you get it. Once again, it's just easy to understand. She's at the end of her rope. Her life has just not gone in any way that she could possibly enjoy. She got traded off to marry a king when she was young. The king's a douchebag. The king's obsessed with some other woman. So even when she loved the king, she could never really get close to him. She had to raise a bunch of kids that are her brothers, you know, pretending that they're the kings. She cares a lot about her kids, not at all about anyone else, and she's just done. She's miserable. She's fucked up. She's just through. If it weren't for her kids, she would have killed herself a long fucking time ago. So the reason she's such a bitch is that she just doesn't care. She has no regard for her life or anyone else's life. If it's not her kids, it doesn't fucking matter. And I totally get that, and it's great. She has one of the best scenes in the show is when she talks to Robert Baratheon about their history and just who they are, and it sort of spells out their characters, and that was the moment that I really got into this show. And I'd still say probably the best dialogue scene in the entire show. Tywin Lannister, I've already brought up, but he's just magnificently overpowering, where he's without a doubt a villain. He's possibly the arch villain. You get the sense that he's just a evil man, but he is so with such conviction, and this also comes through a lot in the performance of his actor, which is magnificent. But he's so controlled and so forward that when he says things, you almost nod in agreement, like you get it. You're like, oh yeah, if that's what your goal is, then this all makes sense. He's so to the point and calculating and just understands everything he's doing perfectly. But even he has spurts of weakness where he has to admit that Tyrion is incredibly intelligent, that he's underestimated this son that he never wanted. And, you know, I think the best moment for Tywin Lannister is when he gives responsibilities to Tyrion, is when he sort of shows that he's, even though he's an angry, evil man, he's still so smart that he can't deny when even his most shameful son is talented. It puts him a step above the kind of villain who would let pride override their ability to see that. And even though he is incredibly prideful, and pride is the main thing that matters to him, he still shows that element of giving in when he knows that he's lost in a way. Joffrey is just magnificent. I loved Joffrey because he is the most evil character possible. And like all the other Lannisters, it makes sense. The way he's raised, we saw how his mom treats him when he's growing up, and he just was raised to believe that he was allowed to do whatever the fuck he wants. He was always told he was going to be king, he was going to be able to do whatever he wants, and he happens to be a complete sadist and a prick, and no one can stop him. And it's not until he already has power that Cersei realizes, oh shit, I've created a monster. and there's nothing she can do about it anymore, which provides some of the best character moments for both her and Joffrey when he shows that he's out of control and sort of sets the whole plot in motion by killing Ned Stark. Altogether, a very fun character. He got to do exactly as much evil shit as was like, you know, how much I could see before getting sick of it before he gets killed, and he has a magnificent death scene, so altogether, great player in the story. All of the Lannisters are badass, that's what I'm getting at here. Moving on to the Starks, Ned Stark is a great character because, again, he is deeply flawed, and as a viewer you acknowledge him as probably the best character in terms of nobility in the series, and everyone in the series acknowledges him as this paragon of nobility, but at the same time, you know, they're like, well, he didn't know how to play the game. But the thing is, I think people underestimate Ned Stark. He did know how to play the game, he just didn't want to play it. He was not ready, and the best line he has is when Varys comes to see him in the dungeon, and he says, I learned how to die a long time ago. He's basically saying that he has no attachment to life. He has no attachment to things. Honor matters to him more than his own life. He knew he was going to get killed for this, but it just mattered to him more that he do the right thing. Catelyn Stark is an alright character. I've read about how in the books she's a lot more of a proactive character who's less about like motherhood and more of a like almost cutthroat mom, like a wolf mother kind of thing, you know. She fucking gets in on the action, has more of a tactical role in Robb Stark's rebellion. Altogether, I thought she was a good character, but she's kind of archetypical. You get what she's gonna be from early in the show. The fact that she makes mistakes, once again, makes her interesting, but overall, not a very standout character. Likewise, Robb Stark and his wife, they pretty much served exactly the purpose that they were gonna have in the story. They never felt like fully realized characters to me so much as pieces in the game who were being moved about, and then eventually they come to their end. There are intriguing parts of their story, and of course the Red Wedding is a fucking legendary scene. It's very well done. But I never was so attached to any of them that I, you know, was like, I wasn't gonna cry at the Red Wedding. It was more like, oh sweet, this is awesome, you know? I can't stand Jon Snow. He is my least favorite character in all of Game of Thrones, because all he does is stand there and make that face, that one face, you know the one, the Jon Snow face. And he goes up to the north and just basically shits around for like 3 seasons until stuff starts happening. In seasons 1 and 2, I really felt like every time they showed the Watchers on the Wall, like at first some of it's, you know, it's world building and stuff, but then it's introducing all these characters up there, like people for Jon Snow to interact with, and just none of it seems to matter. It's just so many characters who have all these moments that aren't really contributing to the story, and his story is so simplistic and basic, whereas the stuff in King's Landing, you have all these characters who are deep and intricate and have this history and these political dealings and backstabbings, and then you go to the Wall and Jon Snow's having like the most basic coming of age story I've ever seen. It's like hero's journey 101 kind of shit. He's got to learn the basics of what it means to be an adult from these mentor characters who die at the obvious points when they're going to die. It's just really cliche and silly, and it feels out of place with the rest of the story to me. Every time they'd go up to the Wall, I'd just get bored and be like, why the fuck is this happening? And then when things finally do start happening for him, it's still totally hero's journey stuff. You know, he has to flip sides, he meets a woman, he has sex for the first time, cave sex. And I hated his girlfriend too, because she just was such a corny character, cheesily acted to me. So altogether, not a fan of Jon Snow or anything to do with the North. I'm not even gonna talk about Sam because he's an idiot, or any of that other shit. I don't care. The North was boring. Arya Stark is a great character because with her, it's all about potential. You're just constantly... She's also having a coming of age story or a hero's journey, but hers is way more interesting because there's like a definitive trend of what it's going for, which is that she's going to be some kind of master swordsman and like obsessed with revenge and kill these fucking characters at some point. Because it starts off with, in season 1, she's being trained by one of the greatest swordsmen in the world. Then she moves on from there to being trained by she gets raised in the gutter kind of thing. She keeps encountering powerful badass swordsmen. And now she's traveling with the Hound, another powerful badass swordsman. And she keeps learning more and more tricks, becoming more and more combat savvy, starts getting her first kills, becomes more and more seething with hatred and desire for revenge. And so with her, you're just watching this almost like ascent into madness. Like she's simultaneously becoming a badass, but also becoming a dangerous, like, sick-minded criminal at the same time. Well, not a criminal, but she's becoming someone who is murderous, who enjoys killing people. And so she's sort of a psychopath warrior, but she's going to be great whenever she finally cashes in on all that potential. Meanwhile, you have Bran and Rickert and their compatriots and stuff, and I don't have a problem with them, but it's a story that you don't really know where it's going. We know that they're going up, they have to do something involving the White Walkers, and there's a bunch of prophecies, but it just feels like treading water right now. I don't dislike them as much because they don't get nearly as much airtime as like the Watchers on the Wall do, and their story is not quite so generic, but it isn't doing anything, so I don't know what to think about it. I think that covers all the Starks. Then we've got Theon Greyjoy, who was just this magnificently douchey character who gets it so bad that it's kind of amusing. It's like you get that he's just an idiot, that he's just a dumb kid who wanted to appease his dad, and so, when all this torture stuff is happening to him, you kind of feel bad, because you're like, oh, he's just some dumb kid, but at the same time, you're like, this guy's such a douche that he totally deserves it after all the bad things he's done, and just the way he acts and the way he carries himself. It's a sort of sick, twisted, like, sadistic viewership where you're watching it and you're like, I know I shouldn't enjoy this, but I totally do. I like his sister. She hasn't really done anything yet, but she seems like a badass, so I like her. Shit, I forgot about Sansa when I was talking about the Starks. Sansa, I think, is another character who is not particularly exciting because she doesn't really get to do much per se, but she's a great character to follow, to see how she kind of just keeps fucking up, because every time she has a choice to make, she ends up making the wrong one, but she wouldn't know. Like, there's no way for her to know which choice is going to be the bad one, but she always ends up taking the worst choice. And so I'm curious with her because I feel like, just like Arya, she's leading up to something. Like, maybe at some point she's going to have this big turnaround, and after learning all these lessons, make her movement. But for now, I don't really know if she's gonna do that, and she doesn't quite have enough personality for me to consider myself like a fan or anything. Then we've got the Targaryens. We've got Daenerys, who is magnificent. I think she's a great, iconic character. I've never seen much appeal to her, like, in terms of her fitting in with the rest of the story, because everyone else, everything they do is very relevant to one another, and she's just kind of this side story that's going to be important at some point, but it's all just build up. But she's an incredibly well done character. Her whole arc of starting off as a slave and then just gradually learning to become like an incredible badass and taking these big risks and big movements and just believing in herself as, I am the mother of dragons, I am the Khaleesi, I am gonna take over. She is very empowering in that regard. And the fact that she wants to free all the slaves and raise this army does not feel cheesy, because it really does feel like she went through that, she hates that, she does not want anyone else to experience that. So it makes perfect sense for her to have this attitude of, I'm gonna free the slaves, kill the masters, and and then go across the sea and take my birthright. And I thought one of her best moments recently was after all these city sieges. She was like, she had been so desperate to cross the sea before, where she was like, I just want to get over there and take my homeland back, and I just got to build my armies quick. And then she finds out that she's losing the cities that she's sacked, like that they are reverting back to the way they were, and she says, you know what, fuck it, we're not crossing the sea yet, I'm gonna go back and fix this shit and get these cities straightened up. And I was like, that shows her character growth up till now, where she finally learned some patience and is like, you know what, fuck, I need to take care of business before I move on. So Dany is definitely an interesting character. I love her handlers. The one guy, the guy who, Jonah or something is his name, who is like her main advisor, he sounds like an Animal Planet like voiceover guy, because all he does is exposition. Like his whole purpose in the story is to explain shit to Khaleesi, so he's always just talking, you know, oh yes, those are the Dothraki, and they are the ones who do this and that, and I just imagine a nature documentary in my head when I hear his voice. All the other minor characters surrounding her are pretty cool, but none of them are like so noteworthy that I remember their names, really. Khal Drogo was pretty cool, but you know, he's dead like since season 1 and hasn't really been relevant for a long time. So returning to King's Landing, Petyr Baelish is obviously one of the coolest characters in the story. The fact that he's so mysterious, so conniving, sets up so many of the biggest movements in the story. Of course he's awesome. But what bothers me about Baelish is that in seasons 1 and 2, I really liked him, and from what I understand, in the books, Baelish is a guy who everyone likes. Everyone trusts him, everyone respects him because he acts like a really nice guy. The whole point was that everyone thinks that he's nice and no one understands what he wants. And so in the show, no one trusts him, no one really likes him, and some people, there seems to be a better understanding of what he's after, although it's possible that a lot of what he says is lies or trying to misdirect you. But in any case, he's just not the same character as the books from what I've read. And as season 3 and 4 go along, for some reason he starts talking in a really gravelly voice, and he always sounds like he's standing right behind you in your ear, telling you, no, don't worry, it'll be okay. And it's fucking weird. I don't know why he's suddenly like this incredible creeper who just, he sounds like fucking Satan. Like he is the devil himself in the show, which I think just makes him too blatant. Like, yeah, I got already that he was a mysterious evil guy who I should look out for, but now it's like shoving down my throat. Meanwhile, Varys, who is, I think of Varys and Petyr as like, Varys is the angel on your shoulder and Petyr is the devil, where Varys wants what's right for the realm and Petyr wants what's right for himself. And Varys is still mysterious. I think, like Petyr, he sort of has evolved into a character who's more direct, where you really feel like, okay, he's the good guy, but even still, there's still that sense of, well, is he? Or are the best intentions for the realm the best intentions for the individual, or will he fuck you over in the name of the realm? Which is what makes him interesting. The old guy is not interesting. I don't know anything about him. Brienne of Tarth is the Spear Lady's name. She's cool because she's just this awesome warrior who's like loyal to a fault and plays well off of whoever she's put with. You know, she's there for Cat at a time when Cat needs her. She's there for Jaime in a way that can help his development because she's just the right character that he couldn't beat her. She's too strong, and his main thing is that he overpowers people with strength. Mind you, he was wounded the whole time. They never got to have like a real fight, but nonetheless, he can't overpower her, and he can't talk to her because she's all noble and he's completely not. So she was just the right character to be like a brick wall for him to smash his head against until he started developing as a character. Margaery Tyrell is a pretty cool character because she knows what she wants and she's going for it, and she's such a great actress. She is at a young age what Cersei is at an old age, but without the cynicism, where Margaery is just as manipulative, just as able to put on a facade, but she's actually ambitious and she actually gives a shit. She doesn't slip up, she's not cruel to people, she's kind, but only as part of getting what she wants. But she doesn't break that. She never does anything evil, but she is a character who's ambitious. And her grandmother is just perfect because she's the slyest one around. You know, she's the person who makes even Tyrion look boring when she talks to him because she completely wipes the floor with him in conversation. She just kind of storms through and just demolishes everyone else. And there's a great scene where she gets to talk to Tywin Lannister, and you know, he's the only one who's like on that level where even though he's not as talkative and doesn't enjoy the verbal sparring as much, he's on that level of thought that she's at where they can communicate and have a great scene together. Robert Baratheon was probably my favorite character in the show up until the point where he died. And I mean, I still think he's great, but you know, other characters have had time to do stuff. But the king, like Cersei, was great because he was so tired, because he totally understood what he was, the fact that he was never going to have his glory days back, the fact that, you know, he was living in a world post everything he cared about. But what was the difference between Robert and Cersei is that Cersei had given up and Robert hadn't. Where Robert, even though he knew that his life was essentially over, he was trying so hard to do the right thing. And even though he knew he couldn't do it because he was like, I just am too broken, but he brought in Ned Stark hoping that at least before he died, he would have someone who could make things right in the capital. He just wanted to have that, you know, like, let me do it okay before I'm gone. Doesn't necessarily succeed, but his death sets into motion everything else, and he was a fascinating character who got a lot of great dialogue before he died. His brothers are less interesting. There was the younger brother, whose name I don't remember. He was the gay one. The coolest thing about him was that he was gay and got to have the first gay sex scenes in the show, whereas there are constant sex scenes, which I'm not really complaining about. I find most of the women dangerously attractive, but nonetheless, it's cool to see some other side of the field being played there. Stannis, he's just so straightforward and straight-faced. There's no humor to his character. There's nothing really interesting about him. The lady in red is the same way. She's not that interesting. But Stannis' vassal, the guy with the fingers cut off, whose name I can never remember, is a cool character. You know, he's interesting and well developed, and the fact that he's so devoted to Stannis, even though Stannis keeps fucking him over, is interesting. And the fact that he will keep betraying Stannis just because he knows better makes him interesting. I want to say I've covered every major character now. I probably forgot some. There's like the Hound. He's cool, but he's the Hound. He is what he is. Most of the characters, other than the ones I've talked about, are very straightforward. They serve a purpose in the storyline. Their personalities fit that well. And because the story is so well crafted, most characters have a great role. They have a great place in the story. Obviously, I don't really care that much about anything that happens in the North, so most of those side characters I don't really find interesting. Pretty much any side character in King's Landing, because I care so much about what happens there, is automatically interesting. I'm definitely interested to see where the whole Brotherhood of Banners characters are going, because they seem pretty cool. A lot of stuff is just characters who are building up to something, characters who have shown a little bit of intrigue or have a good aesthetic to them, but really it's the long run that we're going to wait for to see how they pay off. So anyways, that's all my thoughts about Game of Thrones seasons 1 through 3.5, and I'll talk to you guys some other time.